Good morning, everyone. You are all welcome. Now it is time for our keynote speaker to give her speech. Linda Nubani, PhD, is an assistant professor in interior design at Michigan State University and the coordinator of the Crime Prevention through Environmental Design program, also at Michigan State University. She also served as chair of Environmental Design Research Association. Her current research focuses on the use of space syntax and isovis-based analysis to understand human behavior in different contexts, buildings, and urban environments. Use of virtual reality in environment behavior studies and crime prevention through environmental design. So please join me in welcoming Linda Lumani.
Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today at the 7th International Congress of Livenarch. I will start sharing my screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
Very good. I will be just hiding the controls. Okay, great. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And it's 6 o'clock here in Michigan. Again, it's a pleasure to be speaking at the conference today. My topic, the topic I selected on CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, has received much criticism, especially in the past 20 years. So I will speak to that and address issues that led to that and share with you where we're at with standards and ordinances and evidence for impact. So I would like to start, whenever I introduce CPTED, I always like to share the theoretical background. I believe we're all believe in if you want to work in a good design, you really have to go to the roots and understand the context before implementation. Crime prevention through environmental design, the most commonly agreed on definition, it's a philosophy. And when you say philosophy, that means it's much more complicated than putting, putting all the principles or the guidelines in mere bullet points or a checklist. That's not how it works. It's a philosophy that we need to have an understanding of, on how to properly use elements from the built environment to reduce both crime and fear of crime. And the two are, sometimes they're not related. So they're two different things here. And ultimately enhance quality of life. Common sense. If crime is less and fear of crime is less, then we will be frequenting those spaces that will have an impact on quality of life. So major theories and criminologies and how it led to the development of CPTED. So I will not speak in depth about these theories, but going back to more than 100 years ago from the classical school of criminology up until 1960s, most of these criminology theory, when they speak about crime prevention, they really focus on the actor, the criminal. They focus on the punishment with the belief that if we punish the offender, then crime will be prevented. That's deterrence, that's not prevention. Here in the US, recidivism is quite high when offenders go back to society. Their likelihood that they commit the same crime again. So that's when things started to take a different shape from 1970s until today. There's a much focus on the environment, on the role of architecture, on the role of planning, and everything that we design, from a chair or a bench in the street all the way to our urban spaces. That has taken a major shift in the 70s, especially with the work of Jane Jacobs, which I will speak to. But CPTED was born in the 70s, about 50 years ago. And then I highlighted CPTED in red because it was mostly shaped by architectural practitioners. So this is good. And this is what led to the development of guidelines. But then the rest of them I highlighted in black color here, these were led by criminologists, very well-known criminologists, from routine activity theory to rational choice theory. All of these theories, basically, they focus on the role of environment. They might speak differently, they might use different explanation, but then at the bottom line of all of these theories, from criminology perspective, they focus on the environment and how we design environments for others, and how it's perceived by others. So a suitable target or absence of capable guardianship, which has to do so much with surveillance. And this is the topic that has taken, much hot debate recently, maybe more in 2020 and 2021, which I will address shortly as well. So the crime triangle, if you're familiar with that triangle, it does focus on 3 legs for a crime to occur, and CPTED plays a role on 2 of these legs, and those are about managing the space by eyes on the street concept and a capable guardian. So and that intervention, how do people intervene to stop crime from happening, which I'm referring to as social cohesion. Do you have that or not in the spaces that you create? So this is where CPTED plays a significant role. So CPTED started with Jane Jacobs' book. Everybody knows about Jane Jacobs' Eyes on the Street theory and her great work, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. So how do you engage the spaces in between, to have more eyes on them? What kind of people do you want to have on those streets to guard or create that capable guardianship that criminologists talked about? So Jacobs was a planner, and that was based on her observations. And then Jeffrey, who was a criminologist. In fact, we owe CPTED term to C. Ray Jeffrey, a criminology professor out of Florida. He's the person who said, well, we've been doing this whole thing really, really wrong for 100 years. We've been focusing on the criminal. It is time to focus on the environment, on the architecture, on the spaces in between. How do we design for others? How do we bring others to that space? At the same time, Oscar Newman published almost a year later his famous book, The Defensible Space: Crime Prevention Through Urban Design. Later on, a lot of people attributed CPTED to Oscar Newman, and Jeffrey was fine with that. He was happy to see that at least his theory is being practiced and it is being operationalized. And Newman was a practicing architect and a planner. He had dual degrees. So this is a sketch he provided for a federal report he presented to HUD in 1996. It was a very, very lengthy report where he's distinguishing between 2 spaces. What kind of architecture do you want to have? What kind of behavior do you want to produce? The one on the left, everybody's turned away from the sidewalks. Therefore, you have escaped that guardianship that criminologists talked about. Or would you like to live in an environment on the right side where all this, the windows have their orientation to the street? There's a courtyard, bring people together. So what kind of environment? There are 2 different environments, and the outcome in those 2 environments that you see in this image is completely different and will produce different results. It could fail, your architecture could fail, like the image on the left, or it could really succeed like the image to the right. At the same amount of time, in 1980s, William White, who was a mentor for Jane Jacobs in the 60s, I'm sure in the audience are aware of his book, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. He advocated for the use of seating. Seating is the secret ingredients of public spaces, whether you're offering ledges or you're offering benches or chairs, it does not matter. As long as you have that seating, it's just a very, very simple recipe that will definitely bring people together. So why the misperceptions? Why we have not fully implemented or embraced this philosophy? Don't we like to live in safer environments? So Newman, and from the 70s until late 90s, right, he passed away in 2004. So that was, the years he was active in operationalizing principles for CPTED to make things easier for everybody to embrace, from city planners, architects, designers, and even law enforcement could benefit from CPTED. So he made it easier for us to understand the philosophy. So it's a philosophy. It cannot be really summarized in bullet points, but they can be broadly classified into these 4 categories: natural surveillance, maintenance, access control, and territoriality. How do you do that? So he, out of the belief that architecture dwells in the other, it's about the spaces in between. What bring people together? What kind of spaces do you create for these people to enjoy a quality of life? So when does architecture fail? There are 2 reasons. They're either a structural failure, or mechanical failure, or a social failure. And this is what Oscar Newman was advocating for in the 70s, heavily advocating for in the 70s. And social failure is key to crime prevention. If a city relies on apprehension and deterrence, that city is lost forever. And we've seen that example in many cities here. I'll speak to the US, like Detroit, for example. So the Pruitt IGO project, designed by celebrity architect Yamasaki, the architect of the World Trade Center in New York, he built this development in 1958. A winning award project. It's a glory of architecture based on Le Corbusier's ideas. News media, it grabbed the attention of all the architects in the world when it was first open, huge ceremony. What happened just shortly after? It got demolished. Why? It was not a structural failure. It was a complete social failure. The second it was built in 1950s, that's when gangs moved in. That's when the impact on the entire environment in the entire city of St. Louis was impacted. The poor became poorer, and signs of deterioration were just evidence everywhere. And Oscar Newman was one of the supporters of demolishing this piece of architecture that once received international architecture awards. He was advocating for it because there's no way to solve the problems. This problem was not only in St. Louis. At the same time, because of the recognition that piece of architecture or that style of architecture has gained, we've seen the Cabrini Green in Chicago got demolished around the same time for the same reasons. It brought so much crime in the city of Chicago. It made a middle-class residents migrate to the suburbs and create other pocket cities outside the city of Chicago, which we see some of that problems even today. 50 years later, we see that impact today because of these kind of projects. Again, in Detroit, similar kind of project, again, got demolished less than 15 years. So all of these great pieces of work didn't really last. The Kitty Genovese murder, I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's been a subject of debate in the world of crime prevention for over 50 years. Kitty Genovese, a young woman, was stabbed multiple times for over 2 hours right on that sidewalk. There were 30 people looking through these windows. Not a single person called the police or intervened for help. What does that tell you? Social cohesion was not there. Her brother recently made a documentary and interviewed everybody who lived in that building. He wanted to understand why they saw the murder, their eyes on the street, and they have not called for it to save his sister from dying. And it was really mostly centered around that social cohesion. It was absent from that building. So when architecture fails is when you don't design spaces for others to come together. You get social failure, and that impact would really magnify citywide, not only within that neighborhood. Since the Pruitt IGO demolishing, over 250,000 public housing units throughout the United States were demolished for the same reason, except for a few. San Francis Square in San Francisco was one of the most successful projects for low-income housing. It has everything that people wished for. People in poverty lived in that project, and no crime. It's got the courtyard, that sense of cohesion, that sense of community. People came together, protected one another, and enjoyed the quality of life. And that's what Oscar Newman advocated for in the 70s and 80s. So why isn't CPTED common sense? Not when others fail to understand the connection of architecture to others. I teach CPTED here. I launched the program CPTED as well. We do research and consultancy. And when I speak about CPTED, it sounds like common sense. But 50 years later, common sense is not common sense anymore. These were sketches that were provided by Oscar Newman. He's giving you the secret ingredient of what a successful environment should look like. No matter how good architect you are, your project will never materialize or last or give a good impact, social impact, unless you involve people. So he came up with a participatory method. He involves the community in those decisions. You really have to assess what the community needs. Isn't this what we study in schools of architecture? Assessing clients' needs, but we seem to forget this when we practice. So I was able to get and trace evidence on how he's done it in the 70s and 80s and why his projects were successful. And I found the script. This script was taken from 1996, and he describes a project, high crime neighborhood, referenced as 5 Oaks. It's in Ohio. He said, on my second trip to Dayton, I called the community together and showed them large plans of 5 Oaks. I then asked people to come up to the map, gave them each a different colored felt pen, and said, first, make an X where you live, and then show us what you think of as your mini neighborhood. This script was evidence that he involved the community in those decisions. This was, and I'm sorry for the resolution of these photos in here. I took them out of a very old videotape that I received from Oscar Newman Associate Office. This shows you participatory method in Buffalo as well, New York. And again, this is evidence on how he involved the community input in those decisions. But why isn't CPTED common sense? I go back to this question a lot. Newman wanted to publish his findings, and he's done hundreds of projects in the United States centered around crime prevention and quality of life. He compared a neighborhood he designed that did not have community input with another one that had community impact. He wanted to publish his result, but it got rejected by academic journals. That's unfortunate that the editor didn't have an understanding of the value of community input and participatory method, which we now teach in 2020 and 2021 in our classrooms, but that was not the case in the 70s, unfortunately. So Newman, decided to shift his attention from publishing his results, and they were confined in reports, and just continued to practice what he believes is good for the people. So we don't have too much evidence in academic journals about how this should be done. This is why CPTED is not a common sense. The second misunderstanding was that there were, associations and groups of academics who came up with variations of the term CPTED. You can Google this and find out more. The second generation CPTED and third generation CPTED, and very nice publications, but this may have added to the confusion of maybe, what was wrong with the first generation CPTED, and that's what they called Newman first generation CPTED. So what they have added, they said, well, we have to, integrate the community input, and that social cohesion plays a strong role in crime prevention. But isn't this what Newman called for in the 70s and 80s? So I leave this question to the audience. So CPTED, just to see where it's applied, it could be applied on anything as small as furniture to buildings to public spaces to even neighborhoods. It's something that could be integrated together and should be integrated together for the spaces to work. Here's for example, a sample street segment in my city, actually. So I'm working, this is from a high crime neighborhood, and we've been working in this crime neighborhood to implement CPTED strategies with the community and with the residents. So you can see it lacks that sense of community and the spaces that will bring people together and frequent them. And then we offered them ways, very, very minimal makeup, if you wish to call it, to bring that life back to those street spaces. Here are just more examples of multi-story garages in the United States. It's #1 subject to robberies and violent crimes. So there is now some attention to make them more pieces of art. Why not? Why not celebrate those kind of buildings, but at the same time include that visibility and sense of territoriality that Oscar Newman called for, that eyes on the street, have a cafe underneath to bring that eyes on the street concept. There's so much ways to be creative about those spaces and make them frequented by the public. Similarly, public, bus shelters, that transparency, that divider that you see on the screen, that really gained a lot of criticism, and I will explain why. But CPTED does call for that divider to prevent people from sleeping on a bus stop or even harassment. So when, passengers are waiting for the bus, they want to have that sense of privacy. So it's a good thing. People feel more comfortable. They have that separate seating or that divider, but this was also subject to criticism, and I'll explain why in a bit. So here in Santa Monica, they decided to go for single seaters, and that was it. No more benches, and people are sitting on their own, and they can be encouraged to use the public system. Lighting, of course, is a big deal, and you can see how you can celebrate an environment and make it look safer simply by lighting. But levels of light are also available in the literature. What kind of foot candles do you need, and what kind of color temperature do you need to create safer spaces as well? So here's, these are buildings that were mandated to have CPTED implemented, and these images are from San Francisco, for example. So how do you engage the community? This was a subject for the past 50 years. And approaching Newman's concept, we decided to test it ourselves. So we tested it on 4 different cities already, and we found great success on our approach that I will share with you. So you want to call it participatory method or community engagement, it takes different names. What does that look like? So I'll share that with you. Key ingredient #1, which is the most difficult part. How do you maximize outreach? How do you bring everybody together? You really have to go out of your way and use your connections and news, create project websites. Some people are on Facebook, some people are on different social media platforms. You really have to target the young and the old and all groups and people who reside in that neighborhood. And then engage them once you advertise and give everybody enough time to come and engage them with series of exercises. And you really have to bring everybody together. All stakeholders should be present. Different kind of exercises we found, some of them are basic, but they were the most enjoyed by people. They love doing this. They love getting together. Even sticking sticky notes on back of doors. They love doing this. And of course, we do the analysis when we go back to the university. Here's how the engagement looks like, and again, how you divide people in different groups and make sure you mix people together. You don't put friends on the same table. We really have to make people get to know one another and where they come from and their different perspectives, and then give them all they need, and let them sketch what they want to, their vision. And it's us, the ones with expertise, who can translate this vision into reality. So this is kind of, some of the outcome of the different engagement exercises by different groups of people. And then we're challenged to bring this vision into one. So we have different visions by everybody, and then we bring it to one. It's very important to put everybody in the same page. So what is CPTED and what is crime prevention, what's placemaking and how do you do it? All the different stakeholders, from planners to city officials to residents, are represented in the meeting. And then you bring them together as well, you separate them, and then you have those ongoing discussions and separate discussions. So everybody is in the same discussion, but then you also separate the discussions based on expertise. Visual surveys, most effective, and people like it. They react to it, and then they put their pros and cons, and like what you see over here. And again, we go back and do the analysis and see what they want to see. The most single important exercise, and this was something that Newman has done, is understand fear of crime. Fear of crime and actual crime, sometimes they don't overlap. We've done this, I tested it in different cities. Sometimes it's not the same hotspot. So it's very important for people to realize their own perception. Everybody has their own unique threshold, and it's very important for you to understand this from their perspective. And crime analysis, you get that from the police department. You do those hotspots and you understand how crime moves in an environment. It's very important for you to be very transparent with the community. When we share those findings with the community, it was like, wow, I didn't know this. So it's very important to share all your findings and keep them in touch. No surprises, otherwise your project will fail. And then again, once you have your designs, and we've done several designs for our community, we bring them together and we invite them to come and criticize our designs. So this is with one group, and this is with the police department from their perspective as well. So again, we try to come to the same page, all of us together. This is our graduate students here in this picture, going back and trying to analyze this input and redesigning that vision again and retweaking it. This is just a sample of some of the architecture that we have done. And we work together with this community with very small budget. I'm not going to reveal the budget, but it took a lot of commitment from the community. It took a lot of love. I would like to say that it was the most rewarding experience to work with the community. And each of the business owners, went back to their establishments and started, changing and doing whatever they can do with minimal budget to improve quality of life in their own neighborhood. So this has been done not by the city, but by the people in the city. We've helped as much as we can with research and data and proposed designs, but you can see here the before and after. This is another sample of a plaza that we worked on. There's maybe this hotspot responsible for 15% of the violent crime in our city, and this is what it looked like. And then after that, maybe 2 years later, with a lot of work, you can see the halls over here in the picture. There's an art piece coming up very, very soon. So you can see all of these upgrades, and it was not possible without the community. And you can see here pictures with everybody volunteering their time to work in their neighborhood and make things better for them. So now this was the theoretical background of CPTED and how it should work, but there's so much misperceptions about CPTED, and you can read more about this online, that CPTED is not a humane tool. It's against the homeless. It's a racist tool. I've heard, a lot of these different terms, but how could it be, against the homeless? So this is a picture of someone sleeping on a bench, for example, that does not have that divider. And this is in Los Angeles. And a lot of different cities are now like introducing those dividers for many reasons that I listed, including privacy and prevention of harassment or being harassed as someone waits for the bus to come in. But then it has been criticized because you're really using CPTED to get rid of the homeless, which is inhumane. And I agree with that. It's inhumane to get rid of the homeless, but then violent crimes are rarely committed by the homeless. So really have to understand this. And I advocate for the homeless based on research. It's rarely committed by the homeless, but where do they go? So this is what you really need to understand. Now, there's increased risk of unsanitary conditions associated with the homeless living in the streets. So this is a city should really step up with social programs and should offer rental assistance programs and repair bad credits for the homeless not to be in those streets. Spokane and Washington, the state of Washington has advocated for this. Las Vegas is also doing big advocacy for the homeless. Los Angeles, this is what you see in the Trinity Village. They're kind of creating a sense of community and temporary housing for the homeless, so away from shelters and so on, so they can, live out of the street, off the streets. And this is the image. This is from the Love Square, actually, in Philadelphia. If you know about this site, this is one of the landmarks in Philadelphia, and you can see the homeless sleeping and bathing in the water feature. So is this what, when someone criticizes CPTED and the homeless, is this the scene we want to see? No, I think they deserve better. Oscar Newman always advocated for mixing low income with middle income classes to revitalize those neighborhoods. These are just images of cities that are stepping up and offering those resources, and even free rides for the homeless if someone was living on the street, and taking them to proper homes and so on. And this is what happens when the community deteriorates, especially in low-income areas. And this is a neighborhood I'm currently working on, and these are images from maybe the most dangerous city in America, according to FBI records. And this is what it looks like when it deteriorates. Every single house, the entire neighborhood deteriorates, making a quality of life, absent, completely absent. Who would like to live there, and who would like to work there? So currently, we have, some cities adopted CPTED as an ordinance. Florida, state of Florida, is heavily adopting it, in fact, since the 80s. So they're not new to this, but we're currently kind of creating a database, our center here at MSU, to find out who else in the country is advocating. So far, we have found CPTED to be quoted as standards and in master planning. In my state where I live, I'm currently in Michigan, only one city has CPTED as an ordinance, but other cities have them as language in master planning. But only recently, and after 20 years of work, I'm happy to share with you that CPTED has now become a standard, and it's an ISO standard. The first edition came out early this year, in fact, and you can find more information about the international standard, ISO 22341, Security and Resilience. Of course, it's copyright. So for, there's copyright restrictions. So I just want to share one script in that ISO standard that really looks at concentrate on quality of life. It concentrate on how you should be achieving ownership and pride. Your design should have that sense of ownership and pride. That's the prime number one strategy in any crime prevention effort. So, and I will end my slide in implications. So then this is based on literature. I tried to come up with just one single framework of what the benefits, of designing for others. How do you extend those spaces to reduce crime, to reduce fear, increase property value, even reduce deviant behavior? If someone grows up in an environment that's deteriorated, that will naturally create a deviant behavior that will lead to offenses in the future upbringing. And obviously, CPTED offers a non-discriminatory environment like we've seen in the 70s and 80s. And today, in fact, in 2021, we are hearing conversations about the mixing of low-income housing in middle-income neighborhoods. So we're kind of seeing a step up these days. And social cohesion is a word I now hear every day. Police reform is a word that you hear in 2020 and mostly 2020 and 2021. How do you defund the police and reallocate resources to the public? Well, if you are working on crime prevention, don't you think that you will require less resources from the police? So part of the police reform and the police defunding movement that's happening now in the United States is speaking to the budgets and how those resources should be spent. Again, city and state resources. Obviously, if the city is only depending on law enforcement for crime prevention, then that city is gone. So I believe that deterrence is just 50% of it, but education and learning how to create those spaces to reduce crime is your other 50%. And ultimately, quality of life is the overall outcome. If your property, if your house value is higher, don't you believe that it gets you a higher quality of life? But if you live in a deteriorated house and a deteriorated environment, then the more deterioration, then the lower your property value gets. So it's a whole cycle that will eventually impact the economy of that neighborhood and that city. And finally, I would like to thank the Livenarch organizing committee and extend my thank you to Professor Dr. Ahmed as well for inviting me to speak. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today, and I believe I went for 35 minutes, so I will stop right here. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank Linda for this great presentation. Is there any question, dear attendees? If you want to ask a question, you can write it in Q&A. Okay, we can wait a couple of minutes for questions. I think it's a very interesting and important topic. Thank you for your presentation.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, I see. Is there any question? Okay. I think House Beşkan is coming. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Welcome, dear Linda Nubani.
Oh, hi.
It was a great pleasure to listen you from the screen. I hope we will meet face to face for the next Livenarch congresses. Actually, I had 3 questions, but during your presentation, you answered them all. So I changed my mind, and in order to obey the time rules, I wanted to keep in touch with you with face to face and with my sound and face. So it's another question, but it is a thought that appeared right now after your presentation. I went back to the modernist period, also to the postmodernism, also the movement of deconstructivism, while you're showing some experiences or some architectural design projects from which demolished or as a nice work in Los Angeles, I remember, right? Not sure.
In Francisco, yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that postmodernism was a kind of thing that, a kind of a movement that doesn't pay attention to the social needs, but preferring to make this relationship, I mean, making a cultural ejection with human and architectural space over images, not the social needs or etc., depending on the needs, not social, but the cultural, also functional needs. I thought about this, and after all, there is a thought came to my mind also about deconstructivism. We see lots of architectural designs or new spaces coming around difficult or different forms or with the different materials, not depending on the context usually, but forming a new language, whether in a historical place or whether a place also needs social needs. So it's not a question, but I wonder, what do you think about the deconstructivists addings to the historical places? Are they a kind of other also, or what do they need about the social needs of the people? Not the other, I mean, but the people where they live in those places, in those cities or towns. It's not a question, only a thought. I
Right,
think
right.
that. Thank you very much for this nice
Yeah,
presentation.
yeah.
It was one of the great presentations in our
I'm happy.
this year.
Thank you. I'm flattered, and it's a pleasure meeting you. And I hope we can share emails. But your question it has its own complexity, and I can think of John Hancock's Tower in Boston. Glass Tower in the most historical city in the United States, right? And it received so much criticism, but then when they revealed the plans and, met with the community members so many different times, they were able to see that vision and embrace it. So I believe the key to a successful architecture is people. That social element should really be there. Cincinnati is famous for recruiting celebrity architects all the time, but does that mean it's going to be successful because you are recruiting, Zaha Hadid, Frank Gehry, Peter Eisenman? Everybody has a piece of architecture in that city. Does it mean you're going to get successful place? So it's all about how people embrace it and how they impact it. John Hancock's Tower, the only reason why the historical people who live in the historical area embraced it is because the architecture was designed in a way that looks like a flat mirror, and it will reflect that historical church and where the revolution happened, and it will actually add and emphasize that story of Boston, and that's one of the ingredients why it was embraced. But we've seen lots of riots in the 80s by Reagan, and even the Superman actor, Christopher, I'm trying to remember his name. They all rioted against the Times Square building, which is now the Marriott Marquis. If you recall, it's a big building, modernist, concrete, just a concrete facade. But then over time, they embraced it because it looked like a character, like it embraced the Broadway, the theater, the concept was still there, and then everybody embraced it. And that had a great impact on crime prevention. So it was not demolished. In fact, it was one of the examples that was quite successful in crime prevention. Times Square in New York, before the 80s, it was hotspot for crime in the US, one of the most dangerous places in the US. But crime was reduced almost by over 35% after that piece that was attacked, but later was embraced and so on. So I guess the answer to your question is a complex one, but and understanding the social fabric is the most complicated part of any work, any piece of architecture. But yeah, learning to embrace is key to success, I would say. But how you do it is a complicated one.
Yeah, I congratulate to your works also.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate your feedback, and it's great meeting you. I was telling the committee earlier, I have been to Turkey before, to Istanbul before, but today was my first time in Trabzon.
You're welcome again. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, I think there is no more question. We can wait a few minutes. Any question? Maybe in Turkish, we can translate. Okay. Thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you again. We can close this webinar. The next sessions are going to start at 2 p.m. See you later.
All right. See you, everyone. And thank you so much. And have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.